All right, so we are going to do a law enforcement officer interview. And would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm John Calvert. I'm the school safety specialist for the Kansas State Department of Ed. Currently, formerly I was a school resource officer for 6 years and a law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas for 12.
Awesome. Okay, so I got to work with Officer Calvert last year, my first year as a counselor at Royal Valley High School, and then he left us late in the fall, I think, last year. So we definitely miss him here, but I'm going to go ahead and interview him. So my first question is, can you describe the roles and responsibilities of a law enforcement officer?
Absolutely. Law enforcement is that line. We are the people who say this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. As far as being in a school and dealing with juveniles, I take the National Association of School Resource Officers definition, which is a three-tiered, three-pillared approach, if you will, and it talks about being a mentor, being a counselor, and then being a cop, and building the positive relationships with our youth to be successful. One of the things that I found out a little bit too late in my SRO career was I can't change the world. There's no way that I personally am going to change anything that these kids do. But if I build a positive relationship with them, I can mentor them into being the change that they want to see in their schools and that they want to see in their community. Because change for our youth, especially, has to be student led. Um, but law enforcement officers are those. We're that barrier to protect people. We're there to see people at their worst of times, see people at their best of times. But it's that overall protection and making sure that we're there when we're needed, so that people feel comforted, they can feel safe, and that we can help them out overall.
hmm What do you feel like was the hardest role while being a police officer?
The hardest role for me was going and telling adults that their kids aren't coming home. Um, I got asked that question all the time. The question of how many tickets have you written? How many people have you arrested? And that's countless. For 6 years, my job was patrol. So I wrote a lot of tickets. I arrested a lot of people. Even when I was a school resource officer, I was arresting people, and it wasn't just kids. I would go arrest adults as well. But the number I will always remember is 6, and that's the number of times I've had to go tell parents that their kids aren't coming home.
Mhm.
It's the worst feeling in the world. I pray and I hope that never happens, and somebody has to come tell me that my kids aren't coming home. But that is ultimately the worst news you can ever give somebody, and it's the hardest feeling because the parents hate you,
Yeah.
but they need to feel comforted. So it's a very weird role, and I was very blessed to work in Jackson County for a majority of my career, where the sheriff there would do the death notifications. So that kind of took a burden off my shoulders. But that's definitely the hardest role I've ever had to do as law enforcement.
I bet that would be tough. What was your favorite part about being a police officer?
My favorite part was always interacting with the kids. Being a school resource officer definitely fit my personality, being goofy and out there, and being able to joke around with everybody. Uh, Man, such great memories up there at Royal Valley, whether it was being Santa Claus and dancing with the dance team, playing in the band. Yeah, if you haven't seen that video, it's pretty epic. Um, just a lot of great stories. When the drama teacher writes in a part in her play for Officer John, and gives the character's name Officer John. um, again, it was a different way for me to interact with kids, to show them that I was a human first, and a cop second. But I just love interacting with our kids and doing anything and everything. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you did a good job at that. Can you explain how sign signals and roadway markings help individuals, especially teens, drive safely?
Sure. So these roadway markings, they all mean something. And usually it's a picture. Sometimes there's word like speed limit. We all know speed limit. Okay, that's as fast as I'm supposed to be able to go legally. Um, but a lot of times we can't just spell out and put in paragraph form what all might be happening. There may be a deer crossing, but we don't want to put deer crossing, so we got a picture of a deer. It's just kind of universal. The reason we use symbols and signs like that is because it bridges a whole lot of gaps. If you don't know how to read, if you're from a different country, these things, they're all universal. And so you have a ton of different areas that can be covered by these signs. And it's important to know what they all mean. And if you don't know what they mean, it's very simple to go to Google. You can go to your parents, you can go to an adult, somebody else who drives, and ask, so that when you see these signs, you at least know what they mean. And like I said, it's not just in Kansas, it's all over the country. So a lot of times I would pull somebody over and they say, "Oh, I didn't know that." And I'm like, the sign in Kansas is the same as the sign where you're from. And even overseas, the signs differ a little bit, but they're the same. When I have gone overseas and started driving, I know, hey, that sign looks like our yield sign. I bet that's a yield sign. I should probably let this other car go.
Yeah.
And so the signs are important.
And they're pretty similar across the country and all over.
Absolutely.
As a law enforcement officer, what laws did you see violated the most?
As far as driving is concerned, you're always going to get the speeding and distracted driving far more than failure to use a turn signal or maintain lane. And especially in 2020, when we have technology, it's definitely distracted driving and then speeding.
Yeah. Do you feel like most of those violations are done by teens as well, or do teens break other laws?
Oh, no, absolutely. Teens break those two laws at a higher rate. I don't know what it is. I remember being 16, 17 years old and driving and feeling invincible, having to get out of the house and just go. And so speed, I love to go fast. I think that's part of the reason I became a cop. I want to go fast, so that's what I did.
Mhm.
And now at 36 years old and married for almost 11 years and having two kids, you know what? I'll go ahead and take my time. And if I show up a minute or two later than I normally would have, that's okay. Because I think you tend to realize that if I speed 5 miles an hour over the speed limit for an hour, I will have saved myself roughly 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to go speed 15 miles an hour for 5 minutes, I've saved myself 30 seconds
Hmm.
and put myself and other people in danger. So I think when you're growing up and you're a teenager, you're invincible. Nothing bad will ever happen to you. So I think you go faster a lot more. And then with technology being the way it is, these kids can't keep it out of their face. So definitely they break those laws, and they break those laws at a higher rate than the older people do.
Yeah. So as we talked about earlier, there's multiple signs, signals, and roadway markings that are really important for all drivers to know. So I'm going to be teaching driver's ed here in a few weeks, hopefully. Do you have any suggestions on helping students identify all of these signs, signals, and roadway markings? Like, how can I help them?
I think you show them. Here's a picture of what a railroad crossing sign is. Here's this picture of a school zone sign, and draw similarities. You have your neighborhood crosswalks. Looks a whole lot the same to a school zone crossing.
Mm-hmm.
What do? We slow down. We start looking around. We start glancing for kids, because 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, they don't care that they need to cross in that crosswalk. They're going to run across the street. So when we see stuff like that, we can draw the parallels to that. That means I need to slow down. I might not know if that's a neighborhood crosswalk or if that's a school zone crosswalk, but I know that something's getting ready to happen. So I think showing them the most common signs and signals, talking about it, drawing similarities, and then again, tell them, listen, if you run into a sign or a signal that you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
great time to Google, great time to come ask you as the instructor, great time to ask a parent who's been driving for a few years. It's not the time to have questions.
Mm-hmm. There's never a dumb question. Don't be
Nope.
afraid to ask. Do you think that there are any Kansas laws that are too strict or harsh that you would like to see changed in the future?
You know, the hard there's a hard answer to that. And realistically, if you look at any law that you're like, why is that a law? Research it, and you're going to find that somebody's name is tied to that law,
Hmm.
right? There's something that happened where somebody did something and said, it's not against the law, you can't get me in trouble. Or, hey, this was really dangerous, but there's nothing out there that specifically says that it's against the law. And people are dying, people are getting hurt, whatever it may be. So, so there's somebody's name attached to it. One of my favorite things to do is to look up laws that are on the books from a long, long time ago. And one of them that's my favorite that I obey, because as a law enforcement guy, I'm supposed to obey these. There's a law on the books right now that when you enter Lawrence, the city of Lawrence, you have to honk your horn 3 times to alert the horses. That is an actual law that is on the books for the city of Lawrence. So every time I go to Lawrence, I honk my horn 3 times because that's the law. But what you realize is, in those kind of cases, is that it costs more money to convene, to have somebody motion to take that off the books, to rewrite everything, and to actually take that law off the books than it is to just say, we're not going to enforce that.
Yeah.
So those are fun laws like that. In Topeka, I think one of the laws is that you can't have weeds that are 4 foot high. Like, why is that a deal? Well, because somebody was letting their grass grow, somebody's letting weeds grow. You can't have toilets in the front yard, stuff like that. But it's always got somebody's name tied to it. So when you're talking about whether it be traffic laws or actually like serious laws that are enforced too much, it's tough because when you look back and you say, oh man, the reason that law is in effect is because somebody got killed or somebody got hurt. It's hard for me to say, you know what, I think that's too harshly done, or we need to take that law off the book, because there's a purpose to it.
Yeah. So in Kansas, some of our teens can start driving at the age of 14 with a farmer's permit. Do you think this is too young for kids to begin driving, or what are your thoughts on that in the driving age?
So obviously, especially in Jackson County, farming is a way of life up there. And I can tell you from my interactions with kids, I've met 14-year-olds who are probably more mature than I am. And I've met 14-year-olds that my 5-year-old is more mature than. So if we're going to farm and we're going to drive tractors, we're going to do that kind of stuff to help the family out, it's going to be up to the family to decide, is my child mature enough? There was that law when I was growing up, and I remember as an 8th grader, I had a friend who was driving to school because he had his farmer's permit, and part of it said that he could drive to school, so he was driving.
Yeah.
I went home and said, hey, I want to start driving, and my parents were like, not a chance. And it was because I wasn't mature enough. I know that's hard to believe, but I wasn't mature enough at the age of 14 to get behind the wheel of a car. But other people may be. So you have to go by a kid by kid, case by case basis. I use my own family. My 9-year-old daughter is way more mature and intelligent, and is basically just like her mother, thankfully. She has my last name and will till she's like 40, because she's not allowed to start dating till she's 30. But she's way more mature than my 5-year-old son. And I can say that in probably 3 years, 4 years, when my son is 9, he is not going to be as mature as my daughter. So is it fair for me to say that at the age of 15, 16, maybe my daughter is mature enough to drive, but my son might not be mature enough to drive till he's 17?
Yeah.
Because the other thing is a lot of times when you get into an accident or you start doing stuff like that, there might not be an oopsie. There might not be a second chance. It's, if you get into a serious accident, you can kill yourself, you can kill somebody else, you can totally change the trajectory of your life. And so just because a law says that you can doesn't mean that you have to.
Yeah. I think it's good that your parents thought about your maturity level before letting you drive, and you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it with your kids, because I don't think all parents unfortunately do that.
Right.
So but it's something to think about. And like you said, there could be some huge accidents involved, and they might not get a second chance. So it's
Mhm.
kind of scary if you think about it. After completing some research for a project for this class, I found that laws vary greatly from state to state. Do you think this is okay, or should we have the same laws nationwide?
So I think on some laws it should be nationwide,
Mhm.
but I also understand, and especially in my role now, local control is huge, and so if the laws are going to be overreaching um, the, for the entire country, it takes one of two things: either all 50 states have to come together and agree, or
Mhm.
it's the federal government who says this is what's going to happen. And so I totally understand the fear of why is the federal government telling the states what to do,
Mhm.
and that shouldn't be happening because states have their right to enact their own laws. But I 100% feel like some laws should be kind of across the board, and whether that be criminal laws or traffic laws, there are some that can be, your speed limits, especially if it would help. Okay, if I'm traveling down a two-way interstate or a four lane interstate or whatever, I know that the speed limit's going to be this.
Yeah.
That will help me traveling across states. But again, that's going to take the states to come together, or it's going to be a federal government thing coming over and almost overreaching to the states.
Mm.
Um, and so, again, I can see both sides of the story. I can see why some are and why some aren't. Um, but the main thing is and it goes back to what you were saying about knowing the signs and the signals and everything else. Know what you're doing when you travel. Take that minute and say, okay, if I'm going to Colorado or if I'm going to go down to Texas, I'm going to pass through Oklahoma. What are some laws that I to need to know about? And with Google now, especially, that's a 10-second search.
Yeah. So do a little bit of research before you travel out of state.
Hmm.
Do you think that all teenagers should be required to take driver's ed? Why or why not?
I think they should. I took driver's ed. It was good because again, it was a bonding time between me and my driver's ed class. We got to kind of experience something together. Got to go out and actually drive with an instructor who wasn't my mom, who I think still to this day would probably be white knuckled as I'm driving.
Hmm.
Um, you know, so it wasn't my mom, it wasn't my dad screaming at me. It was an instructor. I got to hang out with a lot of my peers in the class and in the car, and I got to learn a lot of different things that I wouldn't have learned because I would have had no way and no reason to learn it at that time.
Yeah.
Um, so just before I even got out of the car or out into the car, I got to learn a lot of stuff, and then it was a great way to document the number of hours that I've been driving, and go home and talk to my parents about a lot of the things. It was a good conversation starter.
Yeah. So lots of good hands-on experiences and knowledge that you'll need for the future.
Plus, it gave me a discount on my insurance. Who
Yeah.
doesn't want money off their insurance?
Well, that was my last question. So thank you for taking the time to let me interview you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. It was fun.
Thank you.